Good morning. Welcome to the Energy and Technology Committee's meeting on the recommendations of the Hydrogen Task Force. I am State Representative Jonathan Steinberg, co-chair of the Public Health. That was the old committee of the Energy and Technology Committee. We are here today to hear a presentation that will likely lead to some legislative action. I would, as I usually do, yield to remarks by my co-chair and by our ranking members, but none of them are yet here. So we're going to proceed because we want to make sure we afford the presenters every moment to share with us their recommendations. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Brian Garcia from the Green Bank. Good morning.
Good morning. Co-chair Steinberg, Representative Cheeseman, Representative Piscopo, Ranking Member Fazio, I see you online. Good morning. My name is Brian Garcia. I'm President and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Harari to my left. She is the Associate Director of Innovation at the Connecticut Green Bank, strategic advisor to me, and co-chair of the task force. Also online is Erin Childs. She is the Director of Strategy Consulting. Strategy was the coordinator and facilitator of this process, which led to the study. We want to start off by thanking you for providing the Connecticut Hydrogen Task Force with an opportunity to present the findings and recommendations from the study pursuant to Special Act 22-8, an act establishing a task force to study hydrogen power. We have 2 hours to cover a lot of ground. If there's one message we can leave you with today, it is this: if clean hydrogen is an integral part of the future of energy to confront climate change in hard to decarbonize sectors of the economy, then Connecticut, as the result of our strong aerospace industry, has a lot to offer. This is a unique economic development opportunity. Connecticut is home to world-leading research, innovation, and manufacturing companies and organizations, from electrolyzers to fuel cells, that other states and countries want. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to start off by providing you with an overview of the clean hydrogen ecosystem and applications, and then provide an overview of the task force process, findings, and recommendations. In structuring the agenda, we wanted to begin with leaders in the clean hydrogen and fuel cell industry. We want you to see the industrial innovation and manufacturing strength Connecticut has in clean hydrogen and fuel cells. Then we will proceed from sources of clean hydrogen to uses. Again, we have an extraordinary resource here as well, including our utilities, working with our manufacturers abroad to produce clean hydrogen. Within this discussion, we want to stress the importance of environmental justice and just transition, why community engagement and benefits are important to realize. And lastly, Deep will provide an update on the various efforts they are leading, including the comprehensive energy strategy and the regional clean hydrogen hub proposal to the DOE. Following the commissioner, I will have some closing remarks. We have 5 minutes for each panelist, and then from there, we'll open it up with a summary from Erin and then Q&A for the panelists. All right, let's get going. So between the three of us, we're going to tag team the Hydrogen Study Task Force overview. Erin Childs, who is online, coordinated and facilitated this process with her colleagues at Strategy. She is our resident technical expert on clean hydrogen. All right, Erin, let's begin with an introduction to the clean hydrogen ecosystem. Over to you.
Thanks, Brian, and good morning, everyone. Am I coming in okay?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, folks. As Brian mentioned, my name is Erin Childs, and I'm a Senior Director at Strategy Consulting. Our team leads projects relating to emerging technologies, economy-wide decarbonization, and stakeholder engagement. Strategen has been involved in clean hydrogen market development and policy development for over 5 years and has been specifically facilitating hydrogen hub visioning and alignment for over 2 years, focusing on California, the Southeast, and of course here in Connecticut. We supported the Green Bank in managing the Hydrogen Power Task Force, including running working groups and task force meetings, conducting research and analysis, and developing the final report that was submitted to the legislature earlier this year. Our efforts were intended to support robust public participation and ensure diverse stakeholder perspectives were represented and reflected in the final report. Now, just to get us started, I want to talk a little bit about why clean hydrogen is getting such interest, both nationally and internationally. Before we step into the detailed overview, I think this will be helpful for folks to understand the context that we were taking on here. Broadly speaking, clean hydrogen is hydrogen that has been produced with low or de minimis carbon emissions. The federal government defines clean hydrogen on the basis of life cycle carbon emissions and includes hydrogen that has been produced by electrolysis or via steam methane reformation accompanied by carbon capture. If we go to the next slide, I think it's important to note that one of the main reasons why clean hydrogen has been getting such attention, as Brian indicated, is because of its ability to decarbonize hard to abate sectors. The increasing frequency of extreme weather events has highlighted the urgent need for action on economy-wide decarbonization to mitigate climate change and protect our communities' public health and infrastructure. To fully decarbonize energy systems, a clean molecule with low carbon intensity, such as clean hydrogen, will be required to replace fossil fuels in many applications. Specifically, clean hydrogen has been seen as a key tool to decarbonize end uses such as aviation, maritime shipping, heavy-duty trucking, fertilizer production, and high-temperature industrial processes. Next slide, please. Hydrogen has also been garnering attention due to its ability to support the repurposing of fossil fuel infrastructure and the existing fossil fuel workforce. Hydrogen production, transport, and storage requires the use of similar infrastructure to what is currently used for fossil fuel energy sources, including pipelines, compression, liquefaction, and electric sector transmission lines. Similarly, many of the skills required to develop and operate hydrogen infrastructure have significant overlaps with the skills that have been developed by the existing fossil fuel workforce. Through this lens, there is significant opportunity to repurpose, retrain, or upscale workers while transitioning them to participate in the clean energy economy. This overlap in infrastructure and skill requirement helps to reduce the investments required for hydrogen infrastructure and can facilitate a just transition for the existing fossil fuel workforce. Next slide, please. Last, but definitely not least, hydrogen can be produced locally from abundantly available feedstocks, especially locally sited renewables or other zero-emission technologies such as nuclear power and hydro. Especially given the complications to global energy supply chains, we are seeing increased interest from the federal government in supporting locally based manufacturing of hydrogen technologies, as well as production of hydrogen itself. Next slide, please.
If I could just, finally, okay. I was just going to say I was not seeing the slide switch, but this is the first time it switched. Thank you.
Okay. Clean hydrogen can play an important role in Connecticut's decarbonization efforts and overall economic growth, but the scale of its role will be determined not only by economic and market forces, but also by actions taken at the state, regional, and federal level. Key questions still remain with regards to how Connecticut can and should realize the hydrogen value proposition. First, given the nascency of the clean hydrogen industry, additional effort is still needed to understand how hydrogen applications should be prioritized to maximize societal benefits, including energy, environmental, and economic benefits. Second, we still need to understand the best process to facilitate a timely and affordable transition of existing fossil infrastructure and the workforce, and what steps will be need to be taken to support this transition. Last, but definitely not least, there are questions about how the state should pursue clean hydrogen production and use without slowing down the deployment of other necessary clean energy infrastructure, including renewable development and electrification. Our task force process explored some initial answers to these questions, which I think will be discussed in further detail by some of our speakers today. We also identified areas of further research and exploration that should be undertaken by the state to ensure that Connecticut can realize and maximize the potential benefits of clean hydrogen. And with that, Sarah, I think I'll turn it over to you to walk us through the task force process and structure.
Thank you, Erin. So as Brian mentioned at the top, this task force was convened as part of the special act that was passed last year, 22-8. That special act had 7 direct recommendations that we undertook as a task force. Those included a review of regulations and legislature needed to guide the development of the hydrogen industry in the state, recommendations for workforce initiatives, including hydrogen fueled and energy related jobs, thinking about how we can participate as a state and best position Connecticut to take part in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This special act was passed prior to the Inflation Reduction Act. So we also took sort of a broader look at how we could best position Connecticut for federal funding broadly as part of this. We also looked at the existing targeted brownfield development loan program and thinking about how hydrogen facilities can participate in that existing program. We looked at which recommendations would be needed to secure funding for developing hydrogen energy programs and infrastructure in the state. We took a look at the sources of potential clean hydrogen, which were included but not limited to wind, solar, biogas, and nuclear. And finally, we were directed to provide recommendations for potential end uses of hydrogen fueled technology.
And in addition to those 7 areas you identified in the statute, you also gave us some flexibility to include additional areas of study. Alongside sources and uses of clean hydrogen in 6 and 7 above, you have to get it from point A in the source to point B in the use. So we included infrastructure for clean hydrogen, including transportation and storage. In speaking with former Representative David Arconti about this study last year, an important aspect of the study was to understand how Connecticut can position itself to be more competitive within the IIJA, the Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors in Science Act, otherwise known as CHIPS, and the Inflation Reduction Act. In my various roles, I serve on the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. For Secretary Granholm, environmental justice and just transition go hand in hand with confronting climate change. If these areas weren't front and center in the study, then we would be missing a big aspect of what will make Connecticut more competitive in attracting federal resources. So we added environmental justice and just transition to the study and educated the task force and the general public about its importance throughout the process.
So as part of the special act, we were specifically directed to recruit task force members that were appointed by each of the folks listed up here on the screen. We were lucky enough to have ex officios from DEEP, PURA, the University of Connecticut, CCAT, and then us at the Green Bank. And then we were supported by some of the expertise that we have around the state, from industry and manufacturing to our utilities to our generation power sources and many others along the way, including members of the labor forces as well. Really making sure that we hit everybody in the hydrogen ecosystem. So we really wanted to have each member of the task force up to speak to you today, but we thought that would run much further than our 2-hour time slot. So we've selected representative members to join us up here. But I did want to take this time to really thank each member of the task force for their participation, because this was a fast process, but we feel that we were able to unearth really a lot of excellent content throughout it. And that's due to the substantive engagement from all of the task force members. And it was not only, the appointed members that were able to contribute, but also wanted to thank the staff of each of these organizations for the good work that they did. And particular, they're not able to join us today, but we did want to give a special recognition to a few of the task force members, including Chairman Marissa Gillette and her team, including Julia Demain and Taryn O'Connor from Pura, and William Smith, President and CEO, as well as Richard Mullins of Infinity Fuel Cells, who were also very helpful in the process. Finally, Joel Reinbold, the director of the Connecticut Center for Advanced Technology, provided his expertise as we explored the hydrogen ecosystem. Again, thank you to all the task force members. Just wanted to call out a few that weren't able to join us today. So as Erin alluded to in her introduction, as well as having monthly task force meetings, we also established 5 different working groups throughout the task force that were able to meet also on a monthly basis to do a deep dive into some of the different sectors. The first one was really focused on policy and workforce development and was co-chaired by Commissioner Dykes of DEEP and Chairman Gillette of Pura. And that was really looking at the two-pronged need to develop additional policy, review existing policy, and identify the workforce needs to support a hydrogen economy. The second task force was the funding, which was co-chaired by Commissioner Dykes of DEEP and Commissioner Dahm of the DECD. And that was really looking at the federal funding sources, the need for funding, and how we can participate in those cycles, as well as looking at the brownfield loans and development program that we were specifically directed to. The third group that we established was the hydrogen sources, and that was co-chaired by Professor Ur at Ur Paso Giuliari at UConn and Kathy Ayers of Nel Hydrogen. And in that group, we were really looking at where should we be producing clean hydrogen from, where in the state do we have existing resources, and where might we seek to build new resources in the future to produce clean hydrogen. We had a hydrogen infrastructure group, which is, as Brian mentioned, was not part of our specific direction, but when you're thinking about sources and uses, it is very important to think about how do you get the hydrogen from point A to point B. And so that committee was co-chaired by Adolfo Rivera of Avangrid and Chris Capuano of Nel Hydrogen. And finally, we had the hydrogen uses group, which was co-chaired by Joel Reinbold of CCAT and Diganta Chatterjee of Eversource, as well as Frank Reynolds of Avangrid. And that's really thinking about, once we have the clean hydrogen here in Connecticut, what should we be doing with it? What is optimal? What is the optimal uses for it? And I just want to emphasize that, as we looked at each of these categories, we were also thinking about the environmental justice and just transition elements of each of these rather than separating it into its own group, because we really felt that, as Brian mentioned, in order to secure the federal funding, it's important to take that into account in each of these sectors and not isolate it as a necessary component of this study. So as we just talked through, we had 19 of the 21 ex officio and task force members were appointed. We met on the monthly cadence. We were very lucky to find and hire Stratagen as a consultant in this business. Erin and her team were the coordinators for all of us and all the task force, as well as providing the technical assistance. And we met regularly between June and January, at which time we sent the final report to this committee. We also felt that it was important to provide all of our materials in a transparent fashion throughout the process. So the Connecticut Green Bank maintains a hydrogen task force study website where you can see all of the recordings from each of those meetings, as well as the notes, any material that was shared, and all of the meeting minutes from those have been translated into Spanish.
So the Green Bank, we did our best to support a process that resulted in this study. I want to say 3 things about that. First, exceptional involvement of experienced people. We were supported by some exceptionally experienced people who were actively engaged in the process from the start to the finish, including our national labs. Second, designed and delivered a comprehensive process. So this happened over 6 months. We focused the process on findings, recommendations, and stakeholder feedback across the 7 areas we talked about within the statute, and 3 additional areas not contemplated by it. And lastly, the study was complementary to current efforts. In addition to the work led by DEEP on the comprehensive energy strategy, and the regional clean hydrogen hubs. This study provides in-depth analyses that complement those efforts. We did our best to deliver on the expectations of Special Act 22-8. As chairing the stakeholder processes isn't what we do. We finance clean energy projects for families and businesses at the Green Bank. But what we did do is we attempted to follow the best practices of stakeholder engagement as demonstrated by Deep and Pura. And this process resulted in the production of the study before you. At the final meeting of the task force on January 10th, our last resolution was unanimously approved. The resolution included that the study reasonably reflects the findings as identified, analyzed, and deliberated within the process. The study reasonably reflects the recommendations as identified, analyzed, and provided by the working groups and deliberated by the task force within the process. That the Green Bank submit the study to the Energy and Technology Committee by January 15th, whereby the task force terminates its duties per the act, and we've provided you with that study. That the members of the task force and Stratagen make themselves available for hearings on the study with the Energy and Technology Committee regarding the findings and recommendations of that study. And today is that hearing on the study. And lastly, that the chair of the task force respectfully request that the Energy and Technology Committee introduce a bill within this legislative session to address the legislative recommendations in the study. As having observed decades of bipartisan collaboration of the Energy and Technology Committee, we support the leadership of this committee in preparing and introducing this legislation. We look forward to a hearing on that proposed bill where all stakeholders can have an opportunity to comment on these legislative proposals. Having said that, the forthcoming proposed bill reflects our best efforts for how to turn legislative recommendations within the study into public policy. The draft bill does not reflect each organization's position, but instead a way to reflect the recommendations made within the study. So now let me turn this back over to Aaron Childs to provide an overview of these legislative considerations. Aaron.
Thank you, Brian. Our task force process identified steps to be taken by state entities to enable the growth of a clean hydrogen economy in Connecticut. We identified actions for state agencies as well as the legislature. With regards to the legislature, our recommendations are focused on required statutory changes, funding for hydrogen development, and enabling actions to promote community engagement and transparency. I won't read through all of these recommendations. I'll go ahead and let folks take a look at the screen, but I will note that given the imminent and pending competitive RFPs that are being released through various programs within the IIJA, it is urgent that the Energy and Technology Committee and General Assembly act quickly on these recommendations in order to increase Connecticut's competitiveness for federal resources. Brian, do you want to speak to the draft bill now, or do you want to hold that for a minute?
Let's hold it. Keep going. Thank you.
Okay. So as I mentioned, the task force also identified opportunities for state agencies to lead further investigation into clean hydrogen planning, funding, and policy, and to create appropriate venues to engage with critical ecosystem stakeholders on cross-cutting issues related to the future of hydrogen in the state. Relevant topics include additional investigation of hydrogen production, infrastructure, and end uses, identification and expansion of programs relevant to hydrogen, evaluation of additional funding needs, and advancing actions to promote community engagement and transparency. I will also note that during our engagement with state agencies, they have highlighted that many of the activities that we have put up before you are already underway in their existing planning processes.
All right, thank you, Aaron. So that was an overview of the process and what's got us here today. Just looking at the time, I think what we want to do now is to transition into the next, unless there are any questions you want to dive into, they're happy to take those before we transition.
I don't see any questions at this point. Please proceed.
Excellent. All right, so Let's get into the agenda and begin with our world-leading research, innovation, and manufacturing companies and organizations. From innovation to manufacturing, demonstrating the promise of clean hydrogen and the fuel cell industry in Connecticut. So let us invite several members of the task force to join us here at the table. I will introduce them. They will come up, provide their remarks, and then we'll take time for questions for them. So why don't the four of you come on up and we'll shift over here a little bit. All right. Well, we wanted to start off with the University of Connecticut president, Radenka Merrick. Connecticut probably has the only public university in the entire United States of America whose president is a clean hydrogen and fuel cell expert. Also holding the title of the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund Professor of Sustainable Energy, Radenka is the 17th president of the University of Connecticut. Radenka.
Thank you and good morning, chairs, ranking members, and members of the committee. I'm sure by now you know that Bran has a great sense of humor, but I want to tell you that Bran was one of the first who recruited me to Connecticut 13 years ago. And he was on the Green Bank. At that time, state had the funding to bring the world expert in clean energy to Connecticut, and they offered 10 faculty positions. And that's how I finished in Connecticut. So before I start, I want to thank the committee for all the work it does to support clean energy and sustainability in our state. I also want to thank the General Assembly for support of university's proposal with Pratt & Whitney to achieve zero carbon in the aerospace sector through creation of the Center for Sustainable Aviation on our Thurs campus and expanding the one in Middletown. The decarbonization of aviation sector is the most difficult to do, but we are leader in the country and we want to be a leader in the world. I want also to acknowledge close partnership with DEEP, DCD, Northeastern Coalition to ensure that this proposal is successful for U.S. Department of Energy and DOE funding. I want to acknowledge my colleagues in this room because I worked with all of them for 13 years. And I want to acknowledge Joel Stickhat, who has been the best proponent and ambassador of Connecticut and putting the Connecticut on the world map and the Department of Energy. Your investment in Yukon and in this industry is making our state leader in sustainable world. And more than half a century ago, U.S. Moonshot Initiative was supported by Connecticut. Men went to moon because of Connecticut and investment of Connecticut. It was Hamilton Standards, Pratt & Whitney, Yukon faculty who designed the Apollo space shuttle that provided electricity and water on the fuel cells base developed in Connecticut. Today, there is unprecedented time in the history for hydrogen, with interest being amplified worldwide due to its potential to address the climate crisis, as well as energy security and resilience. I want all of us to, in our spare time that we don't have at all, to read 2022 report from International Renewable Energy Agency called Geopolitics of the Energy Transformation, the Hydrogen Factors. China consumes and produces more hydrogen than any other country, annually 24 million tons. We are second consumer, but not second producer. The Department of Energy is focused on regional clean hydrogen hubs to enable large-scale clean hydrogen production and end use in proximity, enabling critical mass infrastructure, driving scale, facilitating market liftoff while leveraging place-based opportunities for equity, inclusion, and sustainability. Priorities will include near-term impact and creation of the jobs and high-value jobs. I'm often asked when clean hydrogen will be available for application. And answer is it's available now. The future is here, right in front of us. In Connecticut, in California, clean hydrogen is being used to provide electricity to consumers. In Indiana, clean hydrogen is being developed for transportation. In Spain, clean hydrogen powers one of country's larger fertilizer plants. Clean hydrogen will bring Connecticut the high-value jobs that we need in order to prosper. I want to share with you an announcement from company Mott yesterday. They had the red ribbon cutting. They're opening 100 new jobs in Farmington. And this is based on clean energy. And they work with Kathy's company. They do research with us and they advance their product. And that's the future. According to the roadmap of the US Hydrogen Economy Report, by 2030, the hydrogen economy in the US could generate estimated 140 billion per year in revenue and support of 700 total jobs across the hydrogen value chain. And we all present the hydrogen value chain. By 2050, it could drive growth by generating about 700 billion per year in revenues. You can ask me, Madam President, you're talking about 2030, what today? Last year, the revenue for the global hydrogen storage market hit 14 billion and is poised to hit 119 in 2027. The task force reports recognize that when it comes to new technology, people need to see, people need to feel and understand them. As a higher education, our role is not just to teach in the classroom our students. Our role is to teach public. And what we are proposing under this task force is to build the Connecticut Clean Hydrogen Innovation Center on our Thurs campus, where we are going to integrate technologies, wind, solars, and electrolyzer, microgrid, and demonstrate them for the public, collecting the data, doing diagnostics, and making that public. Connecticut is uniquely positioned to take advantage of the growth in the clean hydrogen economy. We have the history, the knowledge, the people and the industry at all pieces here, but we must invest. Thank you for your attention.
Aaron, any follow-up?
Yeah, I just want to briefly highlight the three recommendations that Radenka touched on here. So first, as she mentioned, we've proposed the development of a Clean Hydrogen Innovation Center that will allow your average everyday citizen to interact with hydrogen, understand what it looks like, understand what hydrogen technology means. Second, we've proposed a strategic innovation fund that will help to continue to fund Connecticut's leadership in hydrogen. And finally, as Radenka has hit on, we're really looking at some of the opportunities for workforce development and research, and so have a number of recommendations on actions that can be taken to continue to build Connecticut's hydrogen workforce.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Radenka, for that. Now let me introduce Kathy Ayers, Vice President of Research and Development at Nel Hydrogen. At Nel, she's focused on on-site hydrogen generation via water electrolysis, and her technical expertise spans multiple electrochemical devices, including batteries, fuel cells, electrolyzers, and solar cells. Kathy.
Thanks, Brian, and good morning to everyone. I also would like to echo some of Radenka's sentiments. I won't repeat them all in the interest of time, but I certainly appreciate a lot of her comments and also thank the committee for having me. Just a little bit of overview on Nel to set the stage. We've been a hydrogen production company since 1927. The subsidiary in Connecticut, some of you may be more familiar by our previous name, Proton Energy Systems or Proton Onsite. We've been in Connecticut since 1996. We've been in Wallingford for over 20 years. And I think our business case was very reminiscent of all the things that Radenka said in terms of the growth of hydrogen. But we've been a relatively stable company, I would say, over the early part of our history. And it's really, I think, in the last 5 years that we've started to see this exponential growth We've almost doubled our number of employees in the last 5 years, and we're continuing to hire this year. So if we step back just a minute in terms of hydrogen sources, I just want to say that regardless of how fast people believe some of these new applications are coming, some of the ones that Aaron mentioned, maritime, aviation, et cetera, there is a large existing hydrogen market today, over 50 million tons per year, and it's made almost exclusively from fossil fuels. So if we want to decarbonize those areas, we need to be able to make them from renewable sources. Our company makes hydrogen from water, and of course we need the renewables to go along with that, but we can't wait for that to expand our electrolyzer manufacturing capacity, because otherwise we'll be way too slow. We see the transition coming now, and either Connecticut can participate in that or not. We have a plant in Norway that we built with no orders, and it's currently sold out. It produces about 500 megawatts of electrolyzers per year, and we've already ordered equipment for the second line to double that capacity, because we're booked 18 months out. Similarly, we plan to expand the Wallingford facility by about a factor of 10. We had record revenues the last 2 years, and we've sold out many of our products for this year. In addition to that, we're looking for a second plant site. I would also say that competition has grown along with that. So over my 15-year history with the company, we started with, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 credible competitors in the electrolyzer space. We were mainly competing with industrial gas companies. And now there are over 30 electrolyzer companies that we see as credible entities. So if we want to keep up in the space, we need to be innovative, we need to move fast, and we need to invest in the state's resources. Thank you.
So a couple of the recommendations from the report that I'll just highlight here based on what Kathy spoke to is identifying opportunities for the state to allocate funding to support federal match requirements. All federal funding has match requirements of varying levels. And so there may be opportunity to support entities like NEL in pursuing some of these funding. We've also identified opportunities for tax exemptions that can help to support local adoption. We've identified areas where policies can help to create clarity around decarbonization of these hard to electrify sectors and help folks understand where these opportunities will be emerging. And finally, as mentioned previously, continuing to build that strategic innovation fund that will help to maintain Connecticut's hydrogen and electrolyzer leadership.
Great. Thank you, Kathy and Aaron. Thank you. Now let me introduce Tony Leo, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of Fuel Cell Energy. At FCE, he's focused on managing advanced research and development, as well as commercialization of fuel cell products, and is well known throughout the battery and fuel cell industries. Tony.
Good morning. Thank you. As many of you know, Fuel Cell Energy is a Connecticut-based company that has been developing fuel cell and hydrogen solutions in the state for more than 50 years. We have about 400 team members based in Connecticut, which is about twice what we had just a few years ago. We see our purpose as enabling a world empowered by clean energy, and we do that by decarbonizing power and producing hydrogen. Our power generation platforms use natural gas, renewable fuels, or hydrogen to efficiently produce low or zero carbon power and heat without criteria pollutants like particulates and NOx and SOx, for example. And some models of ours are capable of capturing carbon dioxide while they make power, or producing hydrogen while they make power, or producing water while they make power. For example, we are right now commissioning a system for Toyota in Long Beach, California, at the Port of Long Beach, which is going to produce for Toyota 2 megawatts of renewable power, 1,200 kilograms a day of renewable hydrogen, and 1,400 gallons a day of water. Toyota is going to use the hydrogen to fuel their light and heavy duty vehicles that they're operating at the port. And they're going to use the water for a car washing operation. And this is particularly important because their Port of Long Beach is actually in a severe drought area. So that's an example of deployment today. This will be operational in just a few months. So in addition to our power generation systems, we recently introduced a high temperature electrolysis platform that very efficiently produces hydrogen from water and power. Zero carbon hydrogen produced efficiently from renewable or nuclear power can be an effective way to decarbonize the mobility and the industrial applications. We also think that electrolysis is going to play a key role in helping put more and more intermittent renewables on the grid. And the way we do this and the way we think about this is you can create hydrogen from power in low demand times, store it, send it back to the same system to produce the hydrogen during peak demand times to help take some of the intermittency out of renewables. Our electrolysis platform is capable of operating as an electrolysis system, producing hydrogen from power, and those same cells can operate as fuel cells. Send that hydrogen back to the same stacks, and you can produce power from that hydrogen. We think that hydrogen is the most practical long-duration energy storage carrier. It can avoid, we think the batteries are fine for short-duration energy storage, but for long-duration energy storage, you will run into supply scarcity issues, mining issues, and so forth, and you don't have those with hydrogen. So fuel cell is one of the many companies in Connecticut that have contributed to the state being looked at as a fuel cell leader, and we believe that Connecticut can achieve the same leadership in the hydrogen field. So we encourage the legislature and state agencies to act upon the recommendations made in the task force report, such as match funds for federal programs, tax exemptions for hydrogen systems, and establishment of a strategic innovation fund, as we've discussed. This type of support can help grow an in-state hydrogen industry, leveraging the federal funds, which are now being made available to support hydrogen infrastructure. We also encourage the legislature to work with the federal government to achieve alignment around the definition of clean hydrogen and the approach to calculating the carbon intensity of hydrogen production pathways. Widespread use of hydrogen will require a significant level of interstate commerce, and federal standards will help in this regard. The task force recommendations on alignment of hydrogen safety standards and accelerating permitting of projects are also very important. Hydrogen projects can contribute to the state's decarbonization goals, but these will be significant infrastructure projects, and we have to find a way to accelerate permitting if we're going to achieve decarbonization in any reasonable timeline. We recognize this has to be done in light of environmental justice concerns, and it will not be easy, but it is critical if we're going to meet our decarbonization objectives. It should be noted that many hydrogen applications can have beneficial environmental justice impacts. For example, the displacement of legacy fossil combustion resources with hydrogen-fueled fuel cell resources can actually reduce local emissions and noise impacts. And at that Long Beach Toyota project that I mentioned, we're providing power that is renewable and free of hazardous pollutants. And we are reducing Toyota's use of local water in this drought area that is also a distressed community. And the light and heavy duty vehicles that Toyota is fueling with that hydrogen will replace gasoline and diesel vehicles emitting greenhouse and criteria pollutants. Finally, I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments today, and also thank you for the opportunity to serve on the task force. The task force involved a wide range of stakeholder input, and I look forward to similar broad stakeholder involvement as we evolve the state's hydrogen strategy. Hydrogen is going to be a critical part of the energy transition, and the state of Connecticut has an opportunity to play a leading role in the deployment of these technologies. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Tony. All right, now let me introduce Sridhar Kanuri, Chief Technology Officer for Axiom. At Axiom, Sridhar leads global research and engineering and service and installation, and focuses on developing innovative materials, advanced manufacturing processes, and increasing product cost efficiencies to achieve grid parity. Sridhar.
All right. Thank you, Brian. And thank you to the committee for having me here. I want to give a brief background of what we do in Connecticut and how we evolved into Axiom. So to begin with, I just want to mention that Axiom is former UTC Power, where a lot of fuel cell activity happened, starting from the Apollo space mission to doing a lot of the transportation fuel cells that are now coming online, to now being a stationary fuel cell company. And going forward, we are looking to becoming more of a fuel cell and hydrogen company, where we are going to be developing stationary fuel cells, working on electrolysis, and also carbon capture type activities. So I started my career in Connecticut working on transportation fuel cells. So when I started at UTC Power, I worked on fuel cell applications for various automotive companies. I worked on creating prototypes and also teaching these automotive companies about fuel cells. So I worked on prototypes for Nissan, Toyota, Hyundai, BMW, and now we see Toyota and Hyundai launching fuel cell vehicles into the market. So a lot of rich history exists in the state of Connecticut in terms of electrochemical technologies, and we need to take advantage of it and make sure that we are positioned to capitalize on the upcoming hydrogen economy that's going to come up in the next few decades. So at Axiom, what do we do? Currently, our core product is a 440 kilowatt fuel cell that can run on natural gas or hydrogen or propane. To put it in context, 440 kilowatt fuel cell can power roughly 100 homes. And shown on the slide there, I'm going to give 3 different examples of where we have installed our fuel cells and how they perform in providing low carbon and also zero emission technologies. Shown in the middle is a 5 megawatt installation in South Windsor, Connecticut, near our factory. And this one is a fuel cell that runs on natural gas that provides electricity onto the grid. And it's very low carbon because the efficiency of the unit is higher than the traditional grid. Shown onto the left-hand side is our installation in South Korea. It is a 50 megawatt fuel cell that runs on pure hydrogen. So because it is running on pure hydrogen, it has zero emissions whatsoever. And the output of the fuel cell is clean electricity, 50 megawatts of it. And it also provides heat, which is dumped into a district heating loop. And it has completely zero emissions, no NOx, no SOx, or no carbon emissions as part of it. This particular installation, we were able to put it up there because a refinery was upgrading their processes and they were left with a lot of hydrogen. And they came to us and asked, what do we do with it? And so we were able to create a fuel cell platform for them to install these kinds of applications. So as the hydrogen economy picks up, we envision that these fuel cells will become much more prominent and will be able to power the grid in a very clean manner and provide completely zero emission power. The third application onto the right-hand side of the screen is a distributed EV charging, electric vehicle charging, and hydrogen filling station. So we take our traditional fuel cell. We have 2 of our traditional fuel cells that operate on natural gas today. And we've put it at a site where you can generate power that goes onto the grid. And there is an EV charging facility at the same location where customers can charge their vehicles, can pull up and charge their vehicles. And when there is no charging, the power is put back onto the grid. The second application is the unit can be dialed back in terms of power that it produces. And instead of generating completely electric power, you can now generate hydrogen and store the hydrogen that can be used to fuel vehicles. And then the third thing it does is the heat that is provided from the fuel cells is again put back into a district heating loop. So this particular type of application is a very low carbon application where you are very effectively using all of the energy that is up there to provide EV charging or hydrogen fueling and also district heating application. So these are the variety of applications that we can do with the existing technologies that we have today. And most of this technology, or all of this technology, originates from Connecticut. And it's based off starting with the Apollo program that we've had to the transportation program, now to the fuel cells. At Axiom, we are slowly transitioning from natural gas-based products to hydrogen products. We believe natural gas is the bridge fuel that will get us to that clean state that we want to achieve in the near future. We can't just turn off everything and go into hydrogen because it is not available widely today. And a lot of these technologies, as we keep our competitiveness up from our state need to be funded with additional research to get the cost down, need to be funded to commercialize them, both in our state and also to export them. Today, majority of the production from our South Windsor factory, 85% of it goes to South Korea. And then the remaining 15% goes to various places across the US, including Connecticut. Excuse me. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of all the technologies that we have in Connecticut, in addition to what Kathy and Tony have mentioned. These are all electrochemical technologies that have a strong basis from our state, and to move forward and not to lose the competitiveness both in the US and across the world, we need to fund it and also commercialize it. So demonstration programs of these fueling stations, EV charging stations, as more and more of these technologies come up, will be a great benefit to the state. Thank you.
Aaron, did you want to summarize? And then we'll take questions.
So our speakers today, I think, have done a really excellent job addressing a number of the recommendations that we developed through our task force process. President Merrick highlighted the state's scientific and academic leadership and has spoken to a number of the places where we've identified opportunities to continue to build Connecticut's leadership in this space. We've also heard from Kathy about the need for federal match requirements and the near-term opportunities for investment in manufacturing and hydrogen production. We heard from Sridhar about some of the near-term applications, specifically around hydrogen vehicles and critical facilities that will enable near-term use and application of clean hydrogen. We also heard from Tony about the importance of hard to decarbonize sectors and some of the emerging opportunities that are opening up even now in the US, in ports and other parts of the economy where hydrogen will be a critical tool to decarbonize. The recommendations that we have put together are intended to set the state up for success in each of these areas. We're also continuing to recommend investment in technology transfer and commercialization to make sure that Connecticut maintains its leadership in these spaces. Back to you, Brian.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. All right, we're going to open it up for Q&A.
All righty, thank you for these presentations. I think they set the stage for a back and forth that hopefully will be very productive for us. I've long been enchanted, if that's the right word, with the prospects of hydrogen as a potential problem solver for a variety of different needs here in Connecticut. And I can't help but filter this conversation through the lens of Connecticut's and the region's real issues right now, which relate to supply capacity and also what we do on the coldest or warmest days of the year. I'd like to believe that perhaps hydrogen can be part of addressing some of those issues, but there are any number of other things, including both the environmental and the environmental justice issues that we care about as well. But let's start off, for example, with the prospects of storage. We had a comparison between what we have currently by way of batteries versus what hydrogen can offer. If we were to contemplate using hydrogen as potentially a storage hedge, if you will, could that ultimately replace fossil fuels as a hedge fuel? Could we develop fuel cells that would be able to maintain energy long enough to be used on those peaker days? I don't know who want to handle
that. Yeah, I think we absolutely could. The question is the scale of the hydrogen storage. There are places around the country where there are geological formations where you can literally store hydrogen, massive amounts of hydrogen in caverns. I don't know that there's anything like that near Connecticut, but hydrogen just stored in conventional cylinders is a relatively inexpensive way to store energy. So I absolutely think it's a practical, way more practical, in my opinion, than batteries, way to replace fossil fuels, which are great because they're available on a continuous basis, whereas wind and solar are not. But if you can store wind and solar and shift it in time, if you will, through an energy storage medium like hydrogen, I think that definitely is possible.
I guess the obvious follow-up question is, where do we get this hydrogen from?
You make it in electrolyzers from offshore wind would be a big source here in the Northeast, or solar. We don't have the greatest solar in the world, but we do have solar capacity.
Does it matter where we would locate the storage in the context of the broader network?
Well, since you're not storing in a geological cavern, I think you want to store it in a distributed manner, near points of production and consumption.
One
We're
last
also going to
question, then
cover
I'm
this.
gonna,
We're definitely going to dig into this one in the next group.
so I'm setting you up as usual.
you'll
Okay.
Keep going, keep going.
So to your question, one additional point on whether the fuel cell technology exists to run on hydrogen, as demonstrated with that 50 megawatt installation, it runs on complete pure hydrogen, and it's been running for 2.5 years, and it's been operating at 97% capacity. So that means in the past 2.5 years, it was shut down only for 3% of the time for maintenance, and it's been supplying that kind of power because that hydrogen was available. One of the key questions that customers have been asking us is, you have your natural gas fuel cell today. What happens when hydrogen becomes more abundant? Can we transition to it? So the product that we have, it runs on natural gas today. You can take off the fuel processing section that converts the natural gas into hydrogen in future, let's say 5 years down the lane, 6 years down the lane. You can take that section of the power plant out and it can start running on hydrogen. So these are typically 20-year installations for us. And when customers ask this question, we are able to provide that solution today where they can transition to hydrogen when it becomes widely available.
If I just can add from scientific point, hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. So if you think from where the hydrogen can come, what Kathy talked and Sridhar and everybody, you split the water to hydrogen and oxygen, you integrate with wind and solar. The question is how that compares to batteries. We have to talk about materials of the batteries, and I touched on the geopoliticals of the energy and what it means. The component in the cathode of the lithium ion battery is cobalt. And 50% cobalt comes from the Republic of Congo in Africa. So think about geopolitical and what happened when we have small wars, civil wars, and how reliable that power is going to be. The ways to store the hydrogen, there are 3 ways to store the hydrogen: as compressed hydrogen gas in cylinders, as a liquidized hydrogen, and hydrogen stored in chemicals or metals or soil that Tony pointed. So there are ways to store. It comes to economics, it comes to scale, it comes to, what is economically feasible. Thank you.
If I could maybe just add a couple of points. I do think that most of us in the hydrogen field don't believe that hydrogen will do everything. So, but I think there's a range where hydrogen plays and a range where other technologies play. So for short-term energy storage, batteries are probably going to be more likely. But when you get to days, weeks, months, seasonal, hydrogen is really the only thing that can possibly be economic at that scale. And I think that, Tony and Sridhar talked about the scale of their pieces of the puzzle with the fuel cell. Electrolyzers are also growing to the scale that they can actually meet these kinds of demands. So I do think it's the time is right for these types of things to happen.
Thank you. One last question before I hand off. You mentioned South Korea. And while I've always been very excited for Connecticut manufacturers that they found such a place where they've been embraced in such a fashion. What does South Korea have that we don't? We're roughly the same. I know they got K-pop, but that's not. Is there an opportunity for Connecticut to emulate aspects of what South Korea has done to look out for our own energy security?
I can start off. Go ahead. Right. So I'll start off as one of the Korean-owned entities in the United States. One thing that South Korea has done that we could do better is actually implemented a policy and executed on that policy where they force a certain number of renewable applications onto the grid every year. And that allowed them to really quickly scale up the amount of fuel cell installations or hydrogen-based installations in South Korea. So from the time 2014, when we transitioned from United Technologies to Axiom today, we had maybe 10 megawatts of applications in South Korea. Now we have more than 500 megawatts of applications in the past 7-8 years that we were able to put. So quite a lot of installations have happened there. And that was primarily because of the policy where they have forced the utilities to put a certain amount of these onto the grid. They are now coming up with a hydrogen portfolio standard and are going to be looking at putting all kinds of hydrogen technologies, including electrolyzers, transportation applications, and also stationary applications into commercialization and practice, which is going to be implemented, I believe, sometime in the second half of this year and spur that part of it. So we in Connecticut are gearing up with electrolyzers, working with partners to demonstrate the technology. We are looking at putting fuel cells in trucks and buses, and also continuing our traditional stationary fuel cells. So we are morphing from a stationary fuel cell company into a hydrogen company with a lot of value-added products for this transition that is coming up there. And we would like to do the same here in Connecticut and also in the US.
Thank you. Senator Needleman, followed by Representative Mashinsky.
I apologize for coming here late. My seat is too high and I can't move it forward because I'm banging my knees on this table. And you guys must be some engineers. Maybe somebody can figure out how to get this damn chair down. Oh, there's only one button on it. So thank you. And again, I do apologize for getting here late. Got stuck down in Essex. A lot of questions that would be best asked in more one-on-one settings. I do see hydrogen derived from overproduction of renewables as a major breakthrough for us if we can figure out how to do it in an economical way. I just want to jump back to what my co-chair was asking about storage. We don't have caverns here. Obviously, we wish we did, sort of. It would be a great tourist attraction. But we're looking at above ground storage, generally speaking. Cylinders are not going to power a power plant or a major fuel cell installation. So we compress natural gas and make liquefied natural gas. I'm sure we compress hydrogen in a similar way. Kilowatt hour to kilowatt hour, BTU to BTU. How does that compare when you get to the compression numbers?
It depends. If you want to really make it compact and liquefy it, that takes some extra energy. But if you are just compressing it to store, in our reversible fuel cell system, where we make hydrogen and then use the hydrogen to make power again, we get about a 60% round trip efficiency from that system.
And
So,
when you convert that to dollars and cents, is there?
well, I'll give you an example. If you think about just even a not fancy off the shelf hydrogen tube trailer, and figure out how much that can store and how much energy that relates to, and what it costs about $20 a kilowatt hour, that equipment. And batteries these days are $200 or $300 a kilowatt hour, and people think that they can get down to $100 a kilowatt hour. So right away that energy storage vessel is significantly less expensive than a battery.
So the vessel itself, but the process to get it there.
Well, the
and the loss.
the vessel itself is inexpensive, and the reactant is not lithium, or as Rudenka said, cobalt. The reactant is water. It's a water battery, basically. So
Right.
very low cost of reactant. So if you have a 1 hour lithium battery and you want to store for 10 hours, you have to buy 9 more batteries. If you have a 1 hour hydrogen-based system and you want to store for 10 hours, you just have to buy more hydrogen storage.
Mhm.
And so for long duration, it becomes probably not only the least expensive, but the most practical.
So let's say we had a 500 megawatt power plant. Let's pull a natural gas. I love the idea that the fuel cells can be dual fuel. You can, convert over. Let's say we had a 500 megawatt gas-fired power plant, relatively modern. And we wanted to back the grid up, because obviously we're all talking about grid reliability in the Northeast right now. What would a physical installation look like per 24 hours if we needed to back it up? Is that a calculation that anybody sort of offhandedly has? I'm just, again, a lot of this is probably best off for private conversations or one-on-one, not private. Anybody could be part of it, but I just don't want to take a lot of time to get into the weeds. Somewhere in here has got to come a package of incentives to develop this technology, to be part of the regional opportunity that's evolving, take advantage of the federal funds. But somewhere in here, I suspect there's going to be some kind of subsidy required to make this economically viable. But we're all worried about the short-term implications of a decade of winter reliability problems.
Sure.
How do we manage that short-term? And is it possible in this environment, knowing that we're not overproducing renewables, to get enough hydrogen to a source to make it work?
Senator, maybe we can, in the next section, we're going to really dig into this kind of question on supply and demand
Great.
side.
Thank you, Brian.
I just would like to bring one more point, that when we think of the energy security, we think of the climate change and environment. So we have to look the circular economy, from where the raw materials are coming, how energy intensive are the processes of making batteries and fuel cells, and how do we recycle, and what happened when is the end of life after 10 years. Right now, we recycle about 9% of lithium-ion batteries, where the rest is going. So we have to be very careful with economics that includes environments, raw materials, and put everything in content. In manufacturing of the batteries today, it's very energy intensive. It generates 129 grams of the CO2 per 1 kilowatt.
No, I understand that, and I appreciate that you're reminding us of that. The full cost, the life cycle cost of any source of power generation is critical. I think batteries serve a niche place, but they are not going to be the big solution. I think that that whether it's hydrogen or some other method, batteries are a piece of the pie. Not as big as some people think, maybe a little bigger than other people think, but lithium ion batteries are a problem for a lot of reasons, for longer term storage. But the economics of it, I think somewhere in here, we really need to be talking about that. How do we get to, from point A to point B to make this actually work? And is there a pathway here, short term, at least, that allows us to manage our grid insecurity? And that's sort of, we're all focused on that. I think that I personally, in an era of climate change, do not like counting on favorable weather conditions to determine whether or not we have electricity on the coldest days in the winter. I think that's really a bad place to be at. How we got here, we can spend a lot of time debating who's at fault. Everybody's got an opinion. But I think we're all engaged in trying to find solutions to that as a collateral benefit of a long-term strategy to move to more renewables and to get the power we need to electrify our future, so to speak, and get off the fossil fuels. So this is a great piece of the puzzle. If you guys have any solutions on that, I'm always excited to listen to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Mushinski, followed by Representative Horn, followed by Representative Buck.
My question is, thank you for the very interesting presentation. My question is, how long is this interval of bridge fuel for natural gas until we can fully utilize hydrogen as a fuel source? This bridge fuel talk has been going on since 1989. And realistically, how long are we looking at it as a bridge fuel?
I can just be quick. Department of Energy set the target. It's a earshot target, 1 kilogram or 1 kilowatt for $1. So we have to reduce the cost 80% to be there in order to be economical and feasible.
Okay, so what is the timetable in years that we can get to that point, do you think?
10 years.
10 years? Okay, well, it's very exciting and great presentation.
Maybe I can add to that too. So there's actually 2 targets from the DOE. One is to get the $2 a kilogram by 2026, and then $1 by 2031. Fossil fuels, I think hydrogen from natural gas is typically around $1.50 per kilogram. So we're moving into the realm of competitive cost. And then when you add things like a $3 per kilogram production tax credit, it becomes very attractive within the next 5 years.
Can research in Connecticut actually make this cost come down quicker?
Yes. So we announced a strategic partnership with General Motors some months ago. We have a roadmap that takes us to those kind of numbers by 2026. And there's a notice of intent from DOE that will hopefully provide significant investment in manufacturing lines in order to do that. A lot of it is automating the processes and going to more precise methods of applying materials so that we can use less of them.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. And thank you for your answers. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Horn, followed by Representative Buckby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here today. This is very exciting. I wanted to ask, particularly, we just passed legislation that allowed the sort of reshuffling of bond funding to allow for UConn in particular to apply for federal funding for this substantial grant. So I wondered whether you could talk a little bit about the possibility of that program or what that will look like in terms of scale and, the scope of the funding for this piece, what might look like.
So this is collaboration with Pratt & Whitney. So what Pratt & Whitney is looking, and I have my colleague Ur, if he wants to add, who is a PI from UConn on this project with Pratt & Whitney, is really looking combustion process and how we introduce the hydrogen in the fuel stream. And then the UConn part of the project is doing diagnostics. You cannot put something into commercial products without providing the data on the safety and looking to certify. The most difficult to decarbonize is the aviation sector. Rolls-Royce, Airbus, and others are putting significant investment in this, and Pratt & Whitney wants to lead. And I think if we put this investment with significant leverage from the Pratt & Whitney, we can become the hub of the world, not only in Connecticut, because the one that is going to take the longest time to decarbonize is aviation sector. Or anything else that you want to add that it's not confidential?
Thank you. What kind of time frame are we looking for that?
So DOE is going to announce, so they have 9.7 billion put there for the hydrogen hubs. What they are doing, these are not the research projects. The assessment is the readiness to commercialize. And they're putting between 6 and 8 hubs across the country. It's going to be mixed portfolio from the natural gas, the nuclear, clean hydrogen, and looking different sectors. So they are going to make decisions by September of this year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Buckby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, thanks again for everything you brought to us. It's one of the things we were commenting before Representative Cheeseman left the room. So many times we see task forces come through that leave us kind of empty or don't see anything. And this is excessively the other way, which is fantastic to see when a task force is put in place and we actually see it happen. So thank you for all the hard work, each and every one of you. It's fantastic. First question I guess I have is nationwide, where does this put Connecticut in the list? And again, I apologize for being this, maybe it was the first 5 minutes when I was delayed getting here, but where does this put us statewise in this battle to be, one of the strongest players in this game?
Maybe I can start and then I'm sure my colleagues have comments as well. I think Connecticut today has a strong leadership position in the technical skills that we bring, both from our companies, from UConn, bringing up the scientists and training them in these areas. But there's a lot of states that are also putting a large amount of investment in getting hubs to their states and putting in electrolyzer manufacturing in their states. I know Hydrogenics Cummins is putting a 1 gigawatt factory in Minnesota, for example. And so we're at that tipping point of either being able to continue as the leader or losing that leadership to other states at this point.
Right.
Yeah, so to add to Kathy's points, I think the technical skills that we have in Connecticut on these technologies, I would put it as top 3 in the nation, where a lot of our intellectual property is now used across the world in creating these kinds of products. So to keep that competitiveness, we need to have strong programs in collaboration with UConn on these electrochemical technologies and create the workforce that is necessary for future. At the same time, I think to Kathy's point, we need to be able to create those manufacturing capabilities in our state and be able to incentivize companies to create those manufacturing facilities in our state to keep our leadership position, especially in the area of electrolyzers and also the fuel cells that run on pure hydrogen. So those are some of the initiatives we can take to keep our competitiveness for the next few decades going forward.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And if you look at the recommendations that were made by the task force, they are all around helping us keep our leadership position. I do believe we have a leadership position right now. Other states are seeing this activity and they're making movements of their own. But I think we have to work at it, but I think we can keep our leadership position through some of the things we've talked about. And just from our perspective as a company that has had not the easiest time hiring people over the last couple of years, we have to work on workforce development. It will be a key piece of that, in my opinion.
And I want to build on the workforce development. This is the workforce development that we have to invest in order to have, because these are the knowledge of electrochemistries and other system integrations, controls, and everything. And we have to provide more opportunities for students to get those kind of the skills, because each of those companies compete for my student, and each of my student has 5 to 10 job offers. So they get mad because I cannot promise them. So I think we have to invest in order to grow competency of our state and keep those green jobs and companies in Connecticut.
Yeah, one additional point to that is a lot of the young folks that are graduating from UConn and other places, we want them to stay in our state. So that has been a big issue for us, where a lot of the folks that we hire into our organization, they are here for a year or two, and then they look at Boston and they want to move to Boston. So last year, at least from my perspective, I was forced to open a small office in Boston where we could have these engineers stay there, but we don't want to do that. We want them closer to our factory, closer to our labs, and be able to participate in our economy here and be here in our workplace. So that's one of the things that needs to be taken note of, where these young folks need to stay in our state to continue growing this business.
Thanks for that. I mean, obviously, the responses, first off, I have to say the responses are quite noble for a gas that's really not, but that's a whole other discussion. Gotta drop one. It's gotta happen. It is a little bit of a reach. I'll try to keep it light from now on. Sorry. I guess as we're talking more about the business side of things and the businesses connected within the state, there's in this task force and within the panel, I'm curious if I know there's a big name in the industry that's missing within this, and that's Praxair or Lindy, whatever it may. Always Praxair. I'm a Western Connecticut guy. It's always Praxair. Have they been consulted or worked with on this? Because they weren't part of this, but because they're kind of the big player, right? They're kind of the big guys in the whole game.
I know that we collaborate with them at UConn, that we have research projects that we, so they are consulting because this is a big part of their portfolio and future growth.
I would say too, what we see with the industrial gas companies today is they see the markets moving towards electrolyzers and renewable hydrogen as well. And so they have started to act as more of the plant owner operators, where they're doing projects where they will source technology from us and incorporate it into larger facilities, including compression, storage, use, et cetera.
Yeah, they're got one area where they're going to play a role is that right now they make all the hydrogen.
Right.
And so as we transition, and they make it all from fossil fuels. And as we transition from fossil fuels, they're either going to be a part of that or they're not going to be a part of that. And you can bet that, they own the customers, which is mostly petroleum refinery, ammonia production. So they'll definitely be involved, but they will be involved as acquiring equipment from us manufacturers.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think that's important too, that we have, again, it's just to me, that was a key player missing from the whole piece here. That was kind of a noticeably, that's why I just wanted to check on that, because there's a lot in Western Connecticut, not just the best town in the USA, but I'm from New Milford, you know that?
So am I.
Another reason makes it the best town in the USA. But I think that whole Western Connecticut piece is huge to incorporate into this as well, and especially when you have such a player that's over there. I again thank you all very much. This has been maybe it's rising up, but it's one of the best that you have in the.
I think the advertising part of this conversation is over. I see that.
Thank you, Mr.
Brian
Chair.
wants to move on to the next section shortly, but Representative Piscopo, you want to ask your question?
I just want to publicly thank President Merrick for her hospitality. She hosted members of this committee to tour your innovation center. I guess my question would be, would that house this hydrogen where we tour the innovation center and the living science building? Would that?
So Innovation Center, thanks to really your leadership and investment, is an answer to many companies and to solve the problems that we have in materials. But when it comes to this Pratt & Whitney, it's going to be focused on combustion, and it has very different rules and requirements from explosion for vibration. So it has to be a separate building to host those requirements that we will have for the engine and small engine testing, but it's going to leverage on the equipment that we have in IPB building, like Global, looking how materials behave under the temperature and pressure and stress, and simulating what had happened. You don't put in the engine and wait for it to explode. You have to predict. And all that infrastructure is going to leverage that is in IPB. So the combustion center for this proposal with Pratt & Whitney, if we are successful, is going to be in vicinity of IPB and is going to leverage on that investment and equipment that we have in IPB.
Thank you. And with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I just want to follow up on Representative Buckby's questions on. It seems that the market's here. I mean, we're on the precipice of the market, and you're coming before us because you need more research. I think we're ready to go. I'll take 2 cents kilowatt hour in 26. I think you, Dr. Ayers, maybe you touched on this. You have a facility in Norway, did you mention that? And we're already producing this, so it seems the private, and you're off in the private sector, but it seems like the market's ready for us, and what's the holdup with electrolysis? Is it just too expensive to produce on a commercial basis, or that we need?
Yeah, so there's 2 technologies that we produce. In Norway, it's an alkaline technology, and it serves some applications well. Here in Connecticut, we make a membrane-based technology. And today, it isn't at those cost levels. We know what the roadmap is to get there, but it requires significant investment. We've already invested 15 million or so this year in equipment that will be coming to help with that, but there's probably another 50 million. And then to actually build a new plant, I mean, that's a multi-$100 million investment to actually set in place. And so making that investment before we have the sales is kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing.
I understand. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And without further ado, I know Brian is.
All right.
camping at the bit.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you,
all.
panelists.
We may have further questions for you, but we want to make sure we get through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. It feels like I'm very privileged to be sitting next to like superstars of the industry. So thank you for that privilege. All right, we're gonna transition to the sources and uses group, and I'm gonna transition the mic to Sarah Harari, who will coordinate from here.
Hey. Well, so for our next agenda session, we've invited up a group of representatives from the task force to talk about some of the questions that came up in the last section around how hydrogen is produced and used and how we can optimize that within the state of Connecticut. And in this section, we also really wanted to emphasize the role of workforce that also came up in the last panel, and a focus on how we can support all Connecticut residents to benefit from a potential investment in a hydrogen future. So we've invited up in order that they're going to be talking Diganto Chatterjee with Eversource Energy, Adolfo Rivera from Avangrid, Wizi Nuara from Dominion Energy, Aziz Deccan from the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, and Ben Butterworth from the Acadia Center, who's joining us virtually today to talk about sources and uses. So with that being said, I'm going to start with Diganto. So Diganto is the Vice President of System Planning at Eversource and is responsible for the transmission and distribution reliability and resiliency planning across Eversource's tri-state footprint. He guides the advanced forecasting, modeling, and the technical studies that serve as the foundation to the development of the 10 and 20-year transmission and distribution reliability and resilience capital plan. Diganto, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, honorable chairs and committee members. I'm going to take a step back from the discussions that we've had so far. How the hydrogen economy would develop would really depend on how the different sectors adopt hydrogen and where their break-even price points would be relative to where the costs are coming in. And because hydrogen fuel is so new and it has so many, there was that chart that showed how many different applications there are for hydrogen, we should expect a significant fragmentation in this industry. So the way to kind of think about scaling the hydrogen economy in a very self-sustaining manner is to think about those sectors in a chronological timeline. Something we have different interests. We look at everything in one snapshot, and I'm going to try to focus on that chronological timeline because there are some sectors that have the highest challenge, the steepest challenge to decarbonize at the highest price points. Those would be the sectors that will be first adopters of hydrogen at scale. And ideally, we use the technological innovations from those sectors to drive innovations in the other sectors. So there are three sectors that really need hydrogen at scale now and have the steepest challenge to decarbonize at the highest price points. Those are maritime shipping, long-haul trucking, and hard to electrify, carbon intensive industries. So I'll focus on that one step at a time and show how we can do, from a system planning perspective, bring those futures to fruition. So first, touching on maritime shipping. Maritime shipping has to convert to green ammonia. Green ammonia, by the way, is no different than a hydrogen molecule with a nitrogen molecule. Green ammonia is the solution for shipping industry. At -35°C, it has the same energy density as methanol. So we were talking about kilowatt hours per liter. That's about 4 kilowatt hours per liter, which is roughly where methanol is. Now, what can we do about it? We can partner with our European counterparts. Netherlands is building a massive bunkering port right now for green ammonia production. That kind of partnership with Netherlands and Connecticut can actually change maritime shipping routes so that we can get more ships and vessels into our shoreline to come in for bunkering. What can we do in the energy technology sector? We can produce hydrogen at scale with offshore wind. Eversource has proposed a strategic point of interconnection for offshore wind of over 1,200 megawatts in southeastern Connecticut. Now we can produce hydrogen at scale right there, and by association, green ammonia. And then the LDCs can either pipe it to a new bunkering port, wherever the state determines they want to do that, or pipe it directly to these vessels that collect green ammonia and move around between different ports. What can the Energy Technology Committee do specifically? They can direct the next offshore wind procurement to come attached with hydrogen production. So that will then naturally, organically happen. Next sector, long-haul trucking. Now, we all know in the state where long-haul trucking happens, it's along the I-95 corridor and I-91 corridor. So I'll take I-91 corridor first. Most of the solar development has happened in Eastern Connecticut. We're now developing roughly about 100 megawatts of solar per year. That's the amount of solar Eversource is connecting on its system. Most of that is going in Eastern Connecticut. Now, that's going to now slow down because the substation capacity limitations are reached in Eastern Connecticut. So the way to actually propel that is to develop an equitable cost allocation between solar developers and distribution customers for those specific substations, so we can unlock solar potential of Eastern Connecticut in those specific locations. We can then direct incentive adders for hydrogen co-sited production with solar. The LDCs can then build a collector system of pipelines and build a trunk line directly to I-91 corridor somewhere along Middletown. So we can send compressed hydrogen gas directly along I-91 corridor. That takes out the delivery costs and the liquefaction costs if we pipe it directly to I-91. Now let's talk about I-95 corridor. Eversource has also proposed another point of interconnection for offshore wind, over 1,200 megawatts in Southwest Connecticut. We can use that offshore wind to produce hydrogen and pipe it to somewhere along I-95 corridor to build a fueling station for hydrogen along I-95. About 250 megawatts of solar and 1,200 megawatts of offshore wind is sufficient to produce enough hydrogen for long-haul trucks in the state for 2040 demand. But this kind of thinking has to now propagate and socialize to the rest of New England and outside of New England for this vision to actually come to fruition. Then I'll take the last piece, which is the carbon intensive industries in Connecticut. Today, about 70% of the natural gas consumption is in the C&I sector. 40% of that is in the industrial sector, specifically boilers that use hydrogen, boilers that use natural gas for process heating and materials handling. Those sectors, if we can direct incentives to boilers and tax incentives for engines used in materials handling to transition to hydrogen fuel base, then we create a demand for hydrogen, and then Eversource can work with making sure that we can deliver hydrogen to those locations. How would we do that? We would tie it to the transmission system, these electrolyzers, produce hydrogen at scale, and pipe it directly to these facilities. Doing so would enable these industrial customers to be so far ahead of the rest of the nation and significantly improve their global competitive positioning. So in short, in summary, taking these three use cases, directing state incentives for these three use cases, and then in return, having the hydrogen production costs be driven down to roughly the $1 per kilogram naturally, organically, so that we can then use that technology for aviation, power generation, and finally, small distribution resilience applications throughout the state. If we can do this, we can squarely place Connecticut on the leading edge of the nation, if not the world, in hydrogen economy. That's it from me.
Thank you, Giganto. So in the interest of time, rather than having Aaron sort of touch on the task force highlights, I think we're going to go on, and Aaron's going to talk right before we go into the Q&A about the different task force recommendations that got sort of connected in the same way she did on the last panel. So I'm going to turn now to Adolfo Rivera, who is Senior Director of Green Hydrogen at Avangrid Renewables. Prior to his current role at Avangrid Renewables, Adolfo worked on global business development for hydrogen at Avangrid's parent company of Iberdrola. So turn over to you, Adolfo.
Thank you so much, and good morning. And well, you know, as Avangrid, it's an individual, I'm eager to contribute to the task force and hopefully give Connecticut a good insight on how to develop the hydrogen economy, the clean hydrogen economy in Connecticut. So as Sarah was saying, so I've been working in the Iberdrola group for about 14 years. We're a truly global company, and I know the counter was kind of saying or hinting at, you know, the possibility of associating globally with players, and I think Iberdrola and Avangrid in particular is one of those. So I've been working for the last 3 years in developing green hydrogen, and the approach that we take, I think, is a bit different from other companies. I mean, I know that, you know, we also look at macro trends and you know, and how the market is going to go, but we rather look at actual business cases that work. And we're proud to say we're you know, one of the few companies that had actually green hydrogen products that are operating and they're economical and they make sense, right? So we think that we can get up to 20% of decarbonization in the economy with green hydrogen. The rest obviously is going to be electrification of other uses, right? But you probably know that. So going back to our modus of doing things. So we learn by doing. So then, you know, and a couple of years ago, there was the chance to develop green hydrogen projects. We went and thought about a couple of applications that would make sense from a learning point of view, right? And that takes us to today, where we have the largest green hydrogen production site in Europe. And this is a couple of hours south of Madrid, where I'm from. And that is for industrial use of green hydrogen. We partner up with a manufacturer of fertilizer, and their idea, and our idea, is to, you know, slowly phase out gray hydrogen, which is what they use right now, for green hydrogen. Another application that we looked into was public transportation. And so we built a plant in Barcelona. It's very much different from the industrial application because this is in the middle of a city. So think to those two plants, we were able to you know, get a lot of knowledge on how to develop the actual projects themselves. And we're trying to leverage that in the States. And it's a much different economy, but we think that is the, you know, at the head of everywhere in the world. And this is where we're going to invest most of our budget, you know, from here to 10 years into green hydrogen. Actually, you know, when we looked at green hydrogen projects, I mean, it's given us the chance to improve our skills into common management of energy, which is what we do. We own the renewable part, so it's very easy for us to integrate vertically into production of hydrogen. Really, we manage grid complexity, so production of hydrogen is not as complex as that, and we feel confident that we could do that, and we're actually doing it. We're designing the plant and asset management as well, but we're very focused into investment decisions. And if you ask me what keeps me awake at night at this moment, is infrastructure. We need to understand infrastructure to be able to site a project. It's very beautiful to think about energy is going to sink the price and, and everything is going to be awesome. And we're going to have all this amount of hydrogen, but we need to put iron in the ground. And for that, we need certainty on the infrastructure and a lot of more things. I mean, we need certainty on the regulations as well. I mean, as you're probably familiar with, we are looking at the PTCs for hydrogen. At this point, I have 3 to 4 projects that are ready to go, and I'm waiting for the guidelines. So until those come, all the connections that I have with my off-takers, with everybody need to wait, right? I can get the project ready up to a certain point, but to take an investment decision, I have to have certainty on that. That's very important for us. R&D is also important for us. And I think, Connecticut is as a lot of my partners said here, at the edge of that. So that's very important. That's going to help us help the economics of hydrogen, or green hydrogen in this case. And qualified people are key, right? So as you get your team together, you need skills that you can actually get from new people, or you can get recycled from people that come from oil and gas, as is our case, or from renewables. So I think those 4 points are the most important ones. And again, it's not a question of will. I think there's a lot of development capabilities, but it's a question of certainty in the regulation, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Adolfo. Next up, we have Wizi Nuara, who's the State Policy Director for Dominion Energy, where she's responsible for all local, state, and regional policy matters impacting Dominion's Millstone Nuclear Power Station in Waterford, Connecticut. Wizi?
Thanks very much, Sarah. Thank you so much to the committee for inviting us here today to talk about the potential sources and uses for clean hydrogen. As Sarah said, I'm Dominion Energy State Policy Director for New England. We see tremendous potential in clean hydrogen. As you've already heard today, it can be used to achieve deep decarbonization efforts across several different economic sectors here in the state. We were very supportive of House Bill 5200 last year, now Special Act 22-8, creating the task force, and I was honored to serve as a representative of the nuclear power industry. And in November, we invited the task force out to Millstone Power Station to provide a tour and an overview of the station and its capabilities in relation to this discussion. And as you all know from a couple informational forums ago, Millstone Power Station is a 2,100 megawatt nuclear power station in Waterford, Connecticut, produces about 16 to 17 million megawatt hours of base load carbon-free electricity each year. That's more than any other resource in all of New England. Millstone sits on about 550 acres of property in Waterford, and the station itself is sitting on about 150 acres, so a fair amount of space to explore other clean energy technologies on site, like clean hydrogen produced through electrolysis using carbon-free electricity from Millstone, perhaps in a behind-the-meter type configuration. But we do understand the trade-offs of diverting some of Millstone's highly reliable carbon-free electricity. We know it's being contributed to the grid today. Many of Connecticut's valuable carbon-free resources, wind, solar, and nuclear, are being used to support the achievement of the state's 100% zero carbon electricity mandate by 2040. So we will need to think through some of those considerations as we move forward. Like I said, today, all of Millstone's capacity is used to make electricity for the regional grid, but we would certainly consider using some of Millstone's capacity to produce hydrogen if commercially viable. And we're currently exploring that opportunity through the Northeast Clean Hydrogen Hub effort. As we've discussed, we are one of more than 100 different companies led by 7 Northeastern states, including Connecticut, developing a full proposal to the U.S. Department of Energy to secure funding through the IIJA's $8 billion Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub program. And according to that legislation, at least one of the regional hubs will be focused on clean hydrogen production using nuclear energy. But because it's unclear exactly how much capacity we could or would divert to hydrogen production at Millstone, the task force did study several hydrogen production cases using 2.5%, 5%, and 10% of Millstone's average capacity for low, mid, and high production cases, which I thought was a good way to structure the analysis. Of course, it's possible that someday Dominion decides to increase its capacity at Millstone by adding advanced nuclear technologies like small modular reactors. That would be many years down the road. But it's worth mentioning that as demand for clean hydrogen grows, over the next few decades, we'll hopefully see additional forms of baseload carbon-free generation available to produce that clean hydrogen, but also carbon-free electricity. And before I turn it over to our next panelists, I also wanted to note that the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and the Office of Nuclear Energy are already teaming up with utilities to support 4 hydrogen demonstration projects at nuclear power stations in the United States, 1 in New York, 1 in Ohio, 1 in Minnesota, and 1 in Arizona. So we're starting to see some exciting developments in this space, demonstrations of both low temperature electrolysis and high temperature electrolysis using nuclear power with project completion dates in the next couple years. So an exciting space to watch. And with that, I'll turn it over to our next panelist.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Great. So continuing on, Ben is joining us virtually. Ben Butterworth is the Director for Climate, Energy, and Equity Analysis at the Acadia Center. The Acadia Center is working to cut carbon emissions in the Northeast by 50% or more by the year of 2030. And Ben's work there includes managing and conducting the analytical work in support of those goals and initiatives, as well as state implementation efforts. Although he was not an appointed member of the task force, he was actively engaged as a stakeholder within the process, attending many of the working group meetings and providing valuable input. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, as a member of the end users working group, I want to first talk a bit about end use prioritization and specifically on where the report landed on blending of hydrogen into the natural gas distribution system. So firstly, I'd like to say that for the most part, I'm largely in agreement with the end use prioritization presented in the report. I think the report did a good job of recognizing that it'll be essential to allocate limited clean hydrogen resources to the sectors of the economy that are most challenging to electrify, including aviation, shipping, and high heat industrial processes. Page 9 of the executive summary lays out the end uses that fall under the quote highest priority and end uses, and those that fall onto the next tier labeled quote high priority end uses. And although it's not really a focus of the executive summary, one thing I want to highlight was that there's one particular end use that is absent from both these lists, and that is blending of hydrogen into the gas distribution system to heat residential and commercial buildings. It's not until page 88 of the report that there's a more in-depth discussion related to the idea of delivering hydrogen to residential and commercial customers through the gas distribution system. But that section is very skeptical of widespread hydrogen blending as a potential cost-effective climate solution. Page 88 of the task force report states, quote, a meta-analysis of 32 independent studies considering the use of hydrogen-based heating systems for residential customers found that hydrogen was more expensive than electrification, regardless of the climate or region, end quote. This peer-reviewed meta-analysis was conducted by Dr. Jan Rosenow of the Regulatory Assistance Project. The 32 independent studies in this context means studies not carried out by or on behalf of a specific industry. For example, gas utilities or heat pump manufacturers. Page 102 of the report mentions that, quote, heat electrification will ultimately be the most cost-effective option for reducing carbon emissions for core customers, even assuming hydrogen blends are kept at levels that avoid infrastructure upgrades, end quote. The term core customers here refers to residential and commercial customers on the gas distribution system. So clearly the task force report is quite bearish on delivering hydrogen to residential and commercial gas customers, which I think is clearly the right conclusion given the existing evidence. But there's one type of blend the report did classify as a high priority end use. That is hydrogen blending for non-core customers, also known as power generation and industrial heat customers. So I did want to talk a bit about what that actually means because I think it's important. Again, although not discussed in the executive summary, if you scroll down to page 62, you'll see that the report describes how there are two very different, distinct ways to deliver hydrogen to these power generation and industrial customers. Option 1, Connecticut could do so-called facility level blending, where the hydrogen is blended in a very targeted manner that only impacts industrial and power generation customers. Option number 2 is more of a broad brush approach, where hydrogen is blended into the gas distribution network and delivered to all customers, including residential and commercial customers. It's important to understand that these are two completely different strategies. Targeted blending in industrial and power generation facilities is a potentially reasonable use of hydrogen in the long term. Well, widespread blending to residential and commercial customers is an extremely poor use of hydrogen, as the report itself highlights. Even if the intent of widespread blending approach is to deliver blended hydrogen only to industrial and power generation customers, the intent is not really what matters here. If in reality, hydrogen is actually being delivered to all commercial and residential customers as well. Well, the report notes that the power generation and industrial heat blending end use ranked as a high priority refers primarily to blending done at the facility level. Acadia Center would have preferred the language to read refers exclusively to blending done at the facility level. This distinction may appear minor, but in reality, it's critical. In Acadia Center's view, the former, targeted blending to industrial and power generation customers, is a potentially high priority end use. However, widespread blending is clearly a low priority end use. These two very different approaches should not be confused and not both lumped into one high priority hydrogen end use categorization. And one final thought related to an earlier conversation about using hydrogen in electricity generation and long-term storage. In the next 10 to 15 years, it's going to be more cost effective to use limited clean electricity directly. That is to decarbonize the grid and decarbonize electric heating. You can point to any number of modeling analyses that back up this point. The Massachusetts Decarbonization Roadmap, the Princeton Net Zero America Project are two examples. So will hydrogen play a key niche role in electricity generation and long-term storage in the 2040s to complement high penetrations of variable renewable electricity? Yes, quite possibly. But it's important to keep in mind the time scales here. The reasonable role for hydrogen to play in the 2020s and 2040s are very different topics. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ben. So I'm going to invite Aziz to give our final testimony, and then I understand that we'll be taking a short break, after which Commissioner Dykes from DEEP will give her testimony, and then we'll reconvene this panel to answer any questions. So with that, let me introduce Aziz Deccan, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. Although he was not an appointed member of the task force, he was also a very actively engaged stakeholder, providing valuable insight as we were working through what does it mean to have a just transition. Aziz has worked for social and environmental justice organizations throughout his career, and we were very pleased to have his voice in the conversation on hydrogen to bring this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, committee members. I'll make this really quick. So the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs is dedicated to working with diverse constituencies to combat climate change, create jobs, and promote social, economic, racial, and environmental justice. And I'm here to talk about environmental justice. And we all have our own definitions of what environmental justice looks like, and it is. I can tell you what it's not. And environmental justice is not putting manufacturing facilities into communities without their consideration, without community benefits, without talking to the members of those communities in a transparent and open way to find paths that will help their communities and not adversely affect them. So that's how we view, community benefits is agreements are vital to what we're going to do with hydrogen. They've been vital. They have not been vital when we've done it for fossil fuels. So we need to make sure that this is a component of the work that we're doing. The meetings need to be transparent. They need to be accessible. They need to overcome any language barriers that exist in those communities. And finally, whatever we come up with community benefits, we need to make sure that it's agreeable and it's workable to those communities. I mean, one of you committee members, I think it was Representative Buckby, said that this is one of the few policy groups that's actually doing has something. Let's make sure that that happens when we put community benefits together as well. The last piece is workforce development, and I heard my colleague from Fuel Cell say that it's difficult to get workers to hire people. The trades have a very robust workforce development component that will be vital to making sure that there are enough workers in this field to make this happen. The other piece is that we can put as many apprentices out into the field and find jobs for them. What we really need to recognize is there's a transportation issue in this state. And if we can solve that, there's close to 22 to 28% of the people in Connecticut do not have access to vehicles. So how do we overcome that? And how do we make sure that those folks who come into the workforce, those folks who come into workforce, the hydrogen work jobs, have the ability to get to their jobs? So look, I could talk about this forever. I realize that subliminally I wore green today. So I want to make sure that if you have any questions, I will make myself available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you. Sorry that we had to have your comments abridged. We will be breaking in a moment, but I imagine there are any number of questions for the panelists. The committee meeting will commence in a few minutes. We will recess this meeting until that is over, which I expect to be pretty quick. So thank you for your patience, and more importantly, thank you for your presentations thus far. You've stimulated a lot of interest on our side. So we will recess this meeting until 1 o'clock. Maybe we'll actually get started sooner, but let's say 1 o'clock. Thank you all. And again, appreciation for your patience.